What's going on, everybody? Jackson Fuller here, and you are listening to another episode of Hoggin the Might. We are coming a day late today, Tuesday, May 28th, but that's, of course, because Arkansas baseball learned its fate with the NCAA selection show on Monday. So we wanted to wait until we had all that, and Hutch and I had most of our writing done for the real work before jumping on this podcast. But we get to discuss the Fayetteville Regional, a bleak but non-important performance in Hoover, Alabama at the SEC tournament. And also, the basketball team finally added a commit that was long rumored and almost assured to come to Arkansas for what seemed like a month, but he finally pulled the trigger just yesterday. Or a couple days ago, maybe. So let's bring Hutch in, play that rock music, and dive straight into the latest episode of Hoggin the Mic. Hutch, how's it going, man? How did the FOMO of missing out on the SEC tournament quickly wear off after Arkansas went 0-1 and then 0-2, and I was scrambling for a quick flight home?
Yeah, that made me feel a little bit better about not being down there. It's always a meaningless event, which we'll get into later. But it was a little bit of a bummer that I was like, man, I could get to see Hagen Smith pitch or whatever, and it turns out he only throws 2 innings, and it would have been cool to be there, but probably a good decision on my part to stay home and be with the family.
Yeah, let's get into it now. I guess we might be burying the lead with the Fayetteville Regional, but we'll talk a lot about that. Let's just talk real quick, maybe 5 minutes about the SEC tournament. Arkansas, of course, loses the opener to South Carolina and then loses the second game to Kentucky. I don't even think they were technically in the tournament for 24 hours. Meaningless is the right word. I think it was really weird being on site, just how differently these teams were approaching it. And it makes sense based off, LSU felt like they needed a win or two to kind of cement themselves. Same for Vanderbilt. Mississippi State was going for a host. And then you had, the best teams in the league, like Texas A&M and Arkansas, really not caring at all. Tennessee did, lost the first game, but rallied back and won, and they've been the best team all year. So I guess that's fitting, but I don't know. It just is a weird event where not all the teams are completely invested in. Arkansas clearly wasn't. They only pitched Hagen Smith 2 innings. And look, I think that's a smart decision, but that's as obvious as it gets that you don't care about the SEC tournament when you have the best pitcher in college baseball and you're only throwing him 2 innings. And it just shows where the priorities are. I know I maybe have stolen your thunder there, but please rant. I mean, what was some of your lasting impressions maybe coming out of the SEC tournament?
It's just it's a meaningless tournament. It is more times than not meaningless for Arkansas. I mean, yeah, I guess Florida went in thinking like it needed to win a game to make the NCAA tournament, but yet here they are. They're in the NCAA tournament at 28-27, which is ridiculous if we're being honest. So, it's meaningless. To look at the last 3 national champions, they went a combined 1-5 in Hoover. The last 3 SEC tournament champions didn't even make it to Omaha. That includes Arkansas. The one year they won it, they got eliminated in the super regionals, like we have seen before when they've made runs to the SEC championship game. When they finished runner-up, they haven't made it to Omaha. I think they've lost in the regionals each of those years. So there is no correlation between success in Hoover and success in the postseason. Arkansas, I think I looked it up. I think they've had a winning record in Hoover 6 or 7 times, and only one of those years did they make it to the College World Series. Most of those years they lost in the regional with a winning record in Hoover. The years they've made it to Omaha, they have a sub 500 combined record in Hoover. The years they didn't make it to Omaha, they've got a slightly above 500 record in Hoover. So it just doesn't make any sense. People that freak out about that stuff, I feel like there's a lot of fans, and this isn't me trying to bash the fans by any means. There's a lot of fans that have a football mentality where every game matters. You have to win every game or it's the end of the world. You're not going to win a national championship or whatever. That's not the case in baseball. You're playing. Sometimes you got to play for the next game. I think Dave Van Horn said something like, you've got to lose this game, play for tomorrow, or something along those lines. That's what happens in baseball. So it's not a big deal. Yes, I know people are freaking out. They've lost 7 of their last 10. But again, that's not even, there's precedent for that not even mattering. I mean, the 2009 team made the College World Series semifinals despite losing 10 of their last 13 games entering the NCAA tournament. And I think there's a stat, I think Stu Hogg, Corey Stewart, found a stat where the last team that was 3-7 in their last 10 games before the NCAA tournament and was still a top 8 seed was Florida State in, I believe, 2013, and they made it to Omaha. So not a big deal. They do have to play better, but the results in Hoover, I think, are completely irrelevant.
I agree. I think almost everything that we saw in Hoover is pretty much irrelevant. The one thing that we saw that I'm very, very concerned about, and I've been talking to you about this for a little bit now, is the fielding. That fielding percentage still, I think, still ranks in the top 10 nationally. I don't think this Arkansas team is a good defensive team. Like, I mean, okay, good. That might be a stretch. I don't think they are an elite defensive team. Peyton Stovall's been struggling now for a month. It feels like he's had a couple decisions go his way that aren't errors, but I mean, he could easily have 4 or 5 errors in the past 4 weeks. It seems like Dave is pretty much like set on not on doing anything and everything to not play Ty Wilmsmeyer, which makes sense given his offensive struggles this year. But the outfield becomes a worse defensive unit when that happens. Even Ben McLaughlin has had some issues at first base. I think he's done really well on the whole this year, but some issues are popping up. And then Kentucky kind of exposed Hudson White a little bit with the run game. Not that Hudson White's been known as this great defensive catcher, especially against stealing and stuff like that. So the defense, I am a little concerned about. It's been sloppy the past few weeks. And with the way this team hits it, they have to be as clean as possible defensively. They don't have to make every single play, but they got to make most of them. And the 50-50 plays they're starting not to make. Aside from that, I'm with you. It didn't really mean much. I have some solutions that would never happen for this tournament. One, I don't think next year is going to solve anything moving to single elimination. It's just going to make the coaches a little happier about having to go to Hoover and, not having to play potentially six games or whatever it may be. The top 4 seeds would only have to play 3 games to win it all. But what if this tournament, this is a crazy idea. What if this tournament moved to the beginning of the conference season, and I mean, they would never do that, but like, at least that's a way. It's in the middle of the year. It's not right up against the really important stuff. I think it is a special environment where you get, the SEC had 11 teams in the tournament. This is the best collection of talent across the country in college baseball, all at one place. I do think that is special, and it would be nice if it meant something, or even if it didn't mean anything, if the teams treated it, a little bit differently. Play it before the conference season gets going. I don't know. Maybe just completely take it out and play a 3-game series between the top 2 teams. That neither of those are going to happen, but they're like, if they really wanted to sit down and think about, does this tournament, does it get the fans excited? And I think, for a few teams that make deep runs, the answer is yes. And for 80% of the league, the answer is no.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I've tried to brainstorm some potential solutions. I've thought maybe, just have the number 1 versus number 2 team, in a 3-game series hosted by the 1 seed. And you could even extend it, like have the number 3 versus the number 4, the number 5 versus the number 6, and so on and so forth, all the way through, 16 teams starting next year with OU and Texas. I think that would be fun, because then you get the games are at, an actual venue where the great, they have great environments as well. Assuming Missouri doesn't get to host a game. And then, another idea I had, and I think this would maybe defeat the purpose as well, but like, maybe you could do like the top 4 teams, just do like a 4-team regional, like then it could be like a dry run for the next week, start it on a Thursday. So it still gives you an extra day. But then again, you'd still have the possibility of a team having to play 5 games as a top 4 seed. They probably wouldn't like that. And if you did that, you could maybe have the other 12 teams have a their own tournament as well. Like you could, there's certain things they could do, but I think what they settled on, the single elimination where the top 4 seeds get a double bye, the next 4 seeds get a single bye, very similar to the basketball format. I think that's a pretty good solution because, as you said, the top 4 seeds to win it all, you'd only have to play 3 games. That's pretty ideal.
Yeah, for sure. Dave mentioned that, well, that'd be a lot of quick travel if you lose the first game. Well, Dave, you lost the first 2 games, and it was a lot of quick travel. So it's going to happen regardless to some teams. So, all right, let's move on from Hoover. The NCAA tournament officially begins Friday. Arkansas will open the tournament against Southeast Missouri State at 2 o'clock Central Time in the Fayetteville Regional. Of course, Kansas State and Louisiana Tech are the other 2 teams, and they'll be playing, I believe, at 7 o'clock that night. I think all games are supposed to be on. All games will be on ESPN Plus. I think they haven't quite determined the TV schedule past Friday officially. Just what are some initial thoughts you've got, Hutch, on this regional? For me, I think this is a pretty good draw for Arkansas. I know Louisiana Tech is a good, solid team. You've got the Ethan Bates revenge factor to be worried about. 2 DVH former assistants to be worried about. There's storylines galore, but when you look around some of the other regionals, I mean, like immediately coming to my mind, they avoided a couple teams like Duke, Indiana State, some teams that were, flirting with being regional hosts that just ended up not being. Wake Forest, for example, who is, we could have a great super regional matchup with Wake Forest and Tennessee, the Chase Burns rivalry game. Anyways, getting sidetracked. I think that all in all, Arkansas fans have to be pretty pleased with how the regional shaped up for them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was just pulling it up right now. There's a guy on Twitter, Parker Fleming, handles Stats of War. He kind of caught some flack from Arkansas fans last year when he deems Arkansas as having like the 15th best odds to make the College World Series, despite being the number 3 national seed. And it was because by his numbers, Fayetteville had the toughest regional. It was the toughest of the 16. And the big reason for that was TCU was coming to town as a really hot team that maybe underperformed early in the year and it finally put it all together and was probably a regional, hosting worthy team. And they came to Arkansas, and lo and behold, they proved them right. TCU whooped up on Arkansas and sent them home packing, despite being the SEC champion and playing at home. So, but this year, you look at it. Fleming's stats has Fayetteville as the 13th toughest or the 4th easiest regional. So that is a good sign for Arkansas. I mean, we were talking the other day. Kansas State, doesn't exactly put the fear of God into you by any means. They don't look that great. You don't want to underestimate any of these teams. SEMO is a manageable 4 seed. There's been years where they've gotten like ORU in town when they won 45 games. I mean, that's a tough 4 seed. Santa Clara last year, that's a tough 4 seed. There are some tough 4 seeds throughout the years, but SEMO seems to be a little bit more manageable. They're a good ball club. Don't get me wrong. And of course, Louisiana Tech, I think, is a pretty salty team. That they're a team that if the RPI was better, then maybe you'd be looking at them as a regional host. They actually hosted a regional a couple of years ago in 2021. They were the team that lost to North Carolina State, which then came to Fayetteville and ended that season. So it's a favorable draw, but it's hard to say anything's easy at this point of the year because this is the NCAA tournament.
For sure. I think the most favorable thing about this draw is that no team comes in here with a dynamite, surefire, we're scared of him ace. And I think, like, when I'm thinking about the Arkansas season thus far, the Razorbacks have now, after the SEC tournament, they've lost 2 Hagen Smith starts. I would argue that number would still be 1 if he threw more than 2 innings against Kentucky. I know he gave up 2 in the first inning, but both of those were unearned. They lost to Texas A&M start, and he was going up against Ryan Prager, who is, a certified ace, one of the best pitchers in the country. I think Arkansas, whenever Hagen Smith throws, this weekend is going to have a very, 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 very large edge in the pitching matchup, like they always do. But I think it's larger than maybe even they would have expected for a regional matchup. So now the question becomes, and I think the biggest question for Arkansas before the regional begins is, when do you throw Hoggin? Do you throw Friday? Do you throw Saturday? I think we're in agreement on this one after a little bit of text messages yesterday. But what are you leaning, Hutch? Do you think Hoggin gets the ball Friday night in the opener against SEMO, or they save him for a potential Louisiana Tech showdown on Saturday and they give the ball to Gage Wood, or who knows who are the other options?
Yeah, I think that they're going to hold. At least what I would do personally is hold him until the second day on Saturday, because that's such an important game. If you win the first game, it's important because it's the 1-0 versus 1-0 game. You can get yourself in the winner's bracket, or God forbid, if you lose that first game, then you're facing elimination. And who else would you want on the mound facing elimination than Hoggin Smith? So I think that that's important, and then plus, we were talking about, I asked Dave Van Horn, like, hey, what goes into this decision? He talked about the splits. And you were saying yesterday that, SEMO is actually one team that hits righties worse than lefties. So you would have a built-in excuse to not start Hoggin Smith in that first game. You could start Gage Wood. I mean, I guess technically you could start, Brady Tigert, but, probably don't have as much confidence in him right now. Ben Bybee, I guess, technically, but Gage Wood is the obvious answer. And then you'd have Hoggin Smith ready to roll in game 2. And then, if you win those 2 games, and you got Mason Molina waiting in the wings, assuming you start him. And you don't keep him coming out of the bullpen. It's going to be very interesting to see kind of how Dave Van Horn uses these pieces, especially for such a long part of the season. It was obvious, like, oh, well, your 3 starters are definitely Hoggin, Tigert, and Molina in some order. And now it's like, well, I don't know who else is going to start, and I don't know who's going to have what roles. So it's very fascinating, but I do think you've got to hold them, because if you can't beat SEMO with Gage Wood or someone else, then you've got other things to worry about. You're probably not going to win a regional, definitely not going to win a super regional. So I think you got to kind of take your chances in that game 1.
Yeah, we're on the same page. That's what I said last night. If you can't beat SEMO with your number 2 pitcher, you probably can't win a national championship. So you might as well roll the dice a little bit there. Real quick, going back to the SEC tournament, I don't know if you got to watch Dave Van Horn's press conference after the Kentucky game, or because we had the quotes written out for us, but he was pissed at Brady Tigert, like in his body language, in his tone. He was just very upset with the lackadaisical fielding error that he made, and not, going down with just the glove hand, not going down with 2 hands, kind of jogging over to the ball. I mean, he talked about he's an older guy. You can't make that mistake. Like, maybe if you're a freshman, I'll excuse him. He was very upset. And I genuinely think, like, if that play doesn't happen, if Tigert fields that play, I think he gets out of the inning, 2 scoreless innings, all the momentum in the world. And now he's back to kind of square one where he was before the SEC tournament, where I really don't know personally, like, I don't know if Brady's going to throw this weekend. Like, I think he probably will. And if they have to win more than 3 games, I think he definitely will. But if they only need to win 3 games, he didn't throw in the Texas A&M series, and that was 3 games. And the pitching did struggle in that series finale. So maybe they need him to kind of eat some innings. But I think he's way down in the pecking order right now. And I don't think he's an option to start. I just think that's Gage Wood, it's Mason Molina, and it's Ben Bybee are the 3 main options. And if Tigert could come in and relief, that's going to be Dave showing a little bit of faith in someone that he hasn't trusted in recent weeks, and someone he was not pleased with at all down in Hoover. But let's get to kind of our biggest questions for Arkansas. I think obviously the bats are, we've been talking about that all year, and Kendall Diggs as well. But are there any, specific players, bullpen arms, maybe, guys who have hit well this year, but, we need to see it now in the postseason as well? I mean, what's kind of your, some big questions that you've got before we enter the weekend?
I mean, yeah, we've been talking about Kendall Diggs for several weeks now. I know Arkansas fans collectively lost their minds when Dave Van Horn kept putting him in the leadoff spot. I have a hard time believing that that's where he's going to be this week in the regionals. Maybe he is. I mean, he still works the count. It's just that usually it's 6-pitch at bat that ends in a strikeout, opposed to a 3-pitch at bat. But I think that he's going to be moved down. I think he's going to stay in the lineup, but he's not going to be in the leadoff spot. That is intriguing to me. And then maybe on the mound, the easy answer is Will McIntyre. Like what can he do? What can he give you? But I'm also very curious to see what Ben Bybee is going to be, because that's a very, I mean, that he becomes, if Brady Tigert's not going to be a starter, which I agree with. I agree with your assessment. Like, and I didn't watch Dave Van Horn's press conference, but I read the quotes and I could hear Dave in my head, the anger coming out and the frustration. That's just classic Dave Van Horn. And so I think he becomes very, very valuable, especially if you have to play more than 3 games. I think he becomes incredibly important. Like, can he give you a 4-inning start in a win or go home type of game? That's important. So yeah, I mean, I think that Ben Bybee is a guy that is maybe going to be more important in this regional than maybe we anticipated earlier in the season.
I agree. I think he's gonna, if they get to a 4th game, I think Ben's the starter. I would imagine that the rotation this weekend is going to be Gage, then Hoggin, then Mason Molina. But like Dave said yesterday, there just isn't a lot of momentum with the pitching staff right now. I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't surprise me if he decides to go in a different direction, and maybe like throw a starter out there, just an inning, and make it a bullpen game at some point this weekend. Because I could, if they want to win the whole dang thing and go to Omaha and lift the College World Series trophy, I would imagine there might be a bullpen game in the future. With the way this pitching staff is looking right now. I'm going to go a different route though. One player that I'm very much looking forward to seeing in these, season on the line moments is Christian Fouch. I think there's a case he's been the most consistent bullpen arm all season. Him and Gabe Gackel are right there, 1-2. Gackel's probably thrown in some more high leverage situations and just has logged more innings than Fouch, so he probably gets the nod. But Fouch's ERA is below 1. I mean, every time he goes out there, it doesn't really feel like the other team has a chance to score a run. Can he do that twice in a weekend is my question with him. I believe he can do it once. If he comes in Friday after Gage Wood, I think that's a great, 1-2 right there. Can he come back on a Sunday if they need him? Because right now, it feels like I would rather try Gage Wood to come back on a Sunday, his second appearance, than go to Will McIntyre or Brady Tiger, just because of how good I said Wood. I would go to Fouch because of how good Fouch has been in his lone appearances on the weekend. And if you can even get 80% of that, it's probably going to be pretty dang good. So Fouch is the one for me in the bullpen, and then at the plate, I think it's Ben McLaughlin. I think this offense, I think it's kind of sneaky that this offense, he had a little bit of a rough stretch for 2 weeks where he was still getting on base, but he wasn't really producing any runs in a meaningful way. He hadn't hit a homer. The RBIs had kind of dried up. He played pretty well, I thought, at the SEC tournament. When he's hitting well and can be a productive middle of the lineup guy, I think this offense kind of has a different ceiling. And that hadn't been the case down the stretch of the SEC. It's time to kind of right the ship there. And I think if Diggs is struggling, they can't have both Kendall and Ben struggling. And I see more optimism in Ben McLaughlin kind of continuing what he found in Hoover and being a productive batter for Arkansas here in the regional.
McLaughlin has had a pretty good year. I mean, as you said, like he's drawn 50 walks, which if that seems like a lot, it's because it is. That's tied for the most ever during the Dave Van Horn era, with a guy named Andrew Benintendi. Maybe you've heard of him, and then another guy, Jake Duggar, who was another really good player for Arkansas early in the Van Horn era. So I mean, he draws a lot of walks. There are sometimes, I think I've heard Phil Elson say this as well. There's times where it's like you want Ben to swing the daggum bat, because he's got some decent pop in that bat. He had the home run that was robbed in the Kentucky game. That was an incredible play. That would have been a home run to dead center. He's a guy that can hit the ball hard, and I think he uses the whole field. So yeah, I think he would be a really good selection as a guy that in the middle of the lineup can he produce. Especially it's weird because he's hit cleanup a lot this year, and he has kind of the approach of a leadoff guy with all those walks and stuff like that. But I would like to see him put the bat on the ball a little bit more and see what happens.
These stats are courtesy of FridayStarters.com, which I've recently found and is a tremendous website for some college baseball stats. Ben McLaughlin over the last 30 days is hitting 225, and he has just 4 RBIs. So, but with that said, he's got 10 walks. So in 50 at bats, 50 plate appearances, excuse me, he's got 10 walks. And 9 hits. So 19 for 50. That's pretty great on base percentage, which is above 400. So he's still getting on base, still doing what Ben McLaughlin does. It's just the hitting itself has dried up a little bit down the stretch, and I think he can turn it around though. Looking at these stats, Fahiba Aloy has also struggled in the last month. He's only hitting 228, but he still has 3 home runs and 11 RBIs during this last month. So it's just kind of crazy. No one really is hitting that well other than Hudson White and Peyton Stovall. And then Peyton Holt, he seems like a streaky guy where one game he'll have 3 hits and then he could go 0 for 4 for a couple games in a row. So, I know we haven't been able to do too much research, Hutch, but just some initial thoughts on the opponents. We kind of talked, a little bit. I mean, I'll kind of start here and then maybe you can piggyback. I think one interesting question for me with looking at the rest of these teams in the regional, Louisiana Tech, who do they pitch Friday? Because we have that question for Arkansas, but looking at Louisiana Tech stats, and obviously this is the research that I've got because we haven't, followed them all year, but Luke Nichols and Reed Smith are their top 2 starters. And it seems like there's a pretty big difference between the two. Nichols, his ERA is 2 runs lower. He has 1 fewer start and he's thrown 4 more innings. Just doesn't walk, or he does walk more guys, but he also strikes out more guys and just does a better job of limiting, base hits, a better batting average against and stuff. I think it's going to be really key to see how the other teams kind of approach this, because I think there is a scenario maybe where Louisiana Tech tries to save Luke Nichols for Saturday and thinking they can get away with a win over Kansas State. What do you think? What do you think about that? And then, do you have any initial impressions or storylines to watch from any of these 3 teams here at the regional?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one to follow because it kind of really depends. I haven't looked at it. I have to pull up the stats, but I think Kansas State. You pointed it out the other day. They may be worse offensively than Arkansas, if that tells you anything. But they do draw a lot of walks. It seems like when they score runs, they manufacture it from walks, and so I would say Louisiana Tech has to throw a strike thrower. Whichever guy walks the least amount of guys. Sometimes you can have a guy that has really good stuff that walks a lot of people. Mason Molina is a perfect example of that. A guy that is incredible stuff, but issues walks. Like that would be not a good matchup for, in my opinion, like Mason Molina versus Kansas State, just because of how much they thrive on the walks, opposed to like a SEMO who has 100 home runs, and Louisiana Tech has I think 4 guys with 15 plus home runs. Like that's something you got to worry about. The power there. I think Kansas State's more of a. I think they're the team that also has a bunch of stolen bases, right? I'm pretty sure to me it looks a little bit like a Kentucky, but maybe not as good. That to me that's a matchup that would be intriguing just because of can Arkansas not walk them? Can Louisiana Tech not walk them? The catching situation, as you said, Kentucky kind of exposed Hudson White. Would Kansas State do something similar? That's something I was kind of keeping an eye on, and I think SEMO their lineup is pretty good. It seems like they've got pretty balanced lineup. Guys hitting over 300, guys with double digit home runs, up and down the order. So that's something you got to worry about. If you're in that decision of who do you start? Do you trust Gage Wood to keep the ball in the ballpark? Because I think he has given up a few home runs in his recent outings. So can you trust him to keep the ball in the ballpark? And if he does, is it just going to be solo home runs? You can survive that. So those are a couple of things I noticed, in my very brief research yesterday on those teams. That's kind of the stuff that stuck out to me.
Yeah, Kansas State has 125 steals on the year. That's 16 more than Kentucky has on the year, and that's kind of all we talk about with Kentucky. So they like to get out and run. Again, it feels like to me, and I know we've said this a couple times on this podcast, and just everyone is going to say it, in the build up to this weekend is it just feels like if Arkansas can win that first game against SEMO and not pitch Hagen Smith, then they'll be in a great spot to win this regional. And if they can't do that, if they have to pitch Hagen Friday because they feel like, you know, that if Dave feels like he doesn't have the confidence in any of his other arms, or if they lose that Friday game and they have to pitch Hagen Smith Saturday in an elimination game, I don't know. It feels very hard for me to envision this team kind of getting through the gauntlet without without Hagen available in that winner's bracket or whatever it may be. So uh, you mentioned the home runs from SEMA, and I think that's something that is going to be a factor in Dave's decision making because we saw it last week. Gage Wood gave up a couple home runs, I think, against Kentucky. Ben Bybee has had trouble, staying away from the long ball. Mason Molina has too. Like we both said we would save Hagen to Saturday, but I don't think it's like the easiest decision to do that and to pull that trigger.
Yeah, and plus it's a thing. Dave, this is something Dave is every year it seems like we have to ask him this question. It's like when do you throw Blaine Knight? When do you throw Isaiah Campbell? And it's burned them a couple of times. And I remember 2021 they're playing NJIT. He was going to try to start Caleb Bolden in that game. He was a righty. They had Patrick Wicklander, the ace of the staff, who was very good that year. That kind of got overshadowed by the tremendous year that Kevin Kopps had. But they were trying to save Patrick Wicklander for the second game and kind of backfired. I don't think Bolden didn't make it through the second inning, and Kevin Kopps ended up having to throw like 2 1/3 innings in that game. They used like several different arms, and they just kind of had to get through it. And they did win. I think it was like 13-6, something crazy like that. You want to avoid that. You want to have somebody who can give you an extended inning, so you don't get your bullpen all out of whack, because that regional could have gotten interesting if they had not. I think they ended up going 3-0 in that regional, but had they not, and they had to play an extra game against Nebraska, it could have made things very interesting. So I'm very curious to see what Dave decides to do, if he has the confidence to go that route, or if he's like, man, I've been burned before. I'm not going to make that mistake again, and go throw with your guy in game one.
Glad I'm not making the decision because I would be scared of making the wrong one for sure. All right, Hutch. Let's get an official prediction from the both of us. What do you think? Does Arkansas, are they getting out of this regional and hosting a super regional, or does the season end this weekend in Fayetteville?
I think they get through it. I think they go 3-0, but I think it's going to be a really tough 3-0. Even this first game, I think is going to be a little bit tighter than fans hope. And I think, and I'll give you even a bonus prediction, I think they're going to be hosting Mississippi State next weekend.
Interesting. I think they're going to get through it as well. I don't think they're going to be hosting Mississippi State. I think people are kind of The Virginia offense is just one of the best in the country. And I think there's just too many people penciling in Arkansas, Mississippi State right now. It's got my sniff detectors going. This smells funky that we're just completely writing off, Virginia and Louisiana Tech for that matter. So, but I do think they get through this weekend. But I will say what we started this conversation at. I now have the full bracket up in front of me. I think, Oklahoma got Duke, East Carolina got Wake Forest, Tennessee got Southern Miss, and Kentucky got Indiana State. Like those four would have been really difficult 2 seeds, I think, in Arkansas's bracket, just with all those teams have good pitching depth, good hitting depth. They could have easily, a couple different series go their way and their regional hosts. I mean, Wake Forest was the number 1 team in the country entering the year. Now, of course, all those teams other than Southern Mississippi are not exactly in the Arkansas region, so it makes sense that they didn't come here. But for right now, until maybe I'm proven wrong with the results on the field, I think Fayetteville fans should be should be happy with how this draw broke out because, if one of those 4 teams had come here to Fayetteville, I don't know if I'd be as confident about my prediction of Arkansas reaching the Super Regional. And I think I told you this. I feel better about Arkansas in a Super Regional than I do about a regional because it's only 3 games at the max, where Hagen Smith's definitely pitching one of those games, and then I think you could ride a bullpen game in the other, and you've got 54 outs taken care of pretty much right there. So. But that's for next week's conversation. Hopefully, Arkansas gets out of this regional, and we are discussing a super regional preview next Monday or Tuesday. Real quick, Hutch, before we go, let's. I think we got to talk some hoops. DJ Wagner's commitment to John Calipari and Arkansas basketball. The Razorbacks finally have a true point guard on the roster. This brings their scholarship tally to 8. We talked about how Calipari has said 8, 9, 10 at the most is really what he's looking for. I have zero idea where they go for the next roster spot. There's rumblings of some international prospects might be coming to Fayetteville. But for DJ Wagner specifically, feels like a really, really solid pickup. I know he wasn't terrific at Kentucky last year, but it seems like a guy that if he's the 8th guy on your roster, it's a really good 8th guy, and he's got the potential to develop into maybe a top 5, top 3 guy on the roster as well.
Absolutely, and I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Like I still had the desire for Arkansas to add a point guard, and I think this satisfies that. You don't have to have all of that weight on the shoulders of a true freshman in was it Boogie Fland. That worried me a little bit, because a true freshman running the point can go really well, but it can also go poorly. We saw really, flashes of brilliance from Anthony Black, but then there were also, as I said before, moments where he looked like a true freshman. So having a guy like that on the team to help out with that is huge. And I'm just glad it's finally done, because this thing has lasted for so long. I can't tell you how many times we wrote stories on our website at Best of Arkansas Sports with centered around DJ Wagner. We got to the point where we have used every DJ Wagner photo at our disposal. We have no more DJ Wagner photos to use. So I'm just glad that he's finally on board, and that the roster kind of seems to be winding down, as you said. Should really come into clarity in the next couple of days, in my opinion, because the deadline for the NBA draft's early entrants to withdraw and maintain their college eligibility is Wednesday, May 29th. So, if Coleman Hawkins from Illinois or someone like that, if he decides to stick or come back to college, we should get some more clarification there. And then who knows how long it takes on those international guys. I know they're on a guy from Russia, I think. His name's Igor, I think. Very typical, real Russian type of name. That'd be interesting to see kind of what they can do. I mean, they've already got the one European guy and Zvonimir Ivisic, I think is how you say his name. So it'd be very interesting to see if they add another international player to the mix.
They're definitely going for it. I would would ask Arkansas fans to proceed with caution with getting your hopes up. I think, from the minute Calipari arrived, I think there's justified excitement, but I think there was a little bit, the hopes got a little out of this atmosphere, out of this world with the type of roster that he was going to be able to build. I just didn't think it was realistic in such a short time frame. But hey, you go and they get Hawkins and they get that one of these international prospects, I was proven wrong in the end, and he really did kind of build a roster of 10 stars, really 10 potential stars on the team. We will wait and see on that. I will ask, I'm sure someone with the NBA draft or the NCAA is listening to this podcast. Move that deadline up a week. It's ridiculous that we're now going to have to, right in time with the NCAA baseball tournament. It's, we're going to have a lot of college basketball rumors and gossip that naturally develop after guys, remove their name from the NBA draft. So, yeah, if you're listening, let's have some common sense and not, cloud the coverage sphere of NCAA baseball with basketball transfer portal talk. I just don't think that's a good business strategy from the NCAA standpoint. That really does, in this new era that we're headed to, they need to maximize the profit of all of their sports, not just basketball and football, because those sports are when the pay for play eventually arrives, those sports are going to get a lot of the money. And the only way for the other sports to survive is they also bring in some money on their own. Anyways, my mini rant's over there. 40 minutes, Hutch. I think that's good for now. I mean, do you think that when we sit back and we reflect on this Arkansas, regional this weekend, do you think Kendall Diggs is a big story? Do you think he's turned it around, or have you lost faith in Kendall Diggs?
It wouldn't surprise me, but I'm not like counting on it. That if that makes sense. I mean, the same thing with like Will McIntyre. Like if I had to pick one of those two guys to like break out of their funk and play like a huge role in Arkansas winning the regional, I would probably lean toward Will McIntyre. I honestly could see him like, let's say hypothetically, Gage Woods gets a start against SEMO. He goes 3 innings, gives up a couple of bombs, and like, oh crap, we got to go somewhere else. Maybe bring in Will McIntyre, and suddenly he gives you 5 strong innings and gets the win. That I could see that happening. Am I going to bet on it? Absolutely not. But I just, for some reason, I feel more confident that Will McIntyre will be able to get it turned around, maybe more so than Kendall Diggs. But neither one of them would surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if either one of them, if neither of them gets it going and their struggles continue. Literally nothing about this baseball team could surprise me at this point.
I've honestly reached the point with Kendall Diggs. I think he should be benched especially against lefties. I think it should be Peyton Holt, Ty Wellensmeyer, and whoever in left field. Jason Jones maybe against lefties, or Will Edmondson has had a couple good at bats recently. I understand Dave's not going to do that, and I understand why he's not going to do that. But man, these struggles have they've lasted too long. It feels like every time he comes up, there's runners in scoring position or a runner on base, and then when there's nobody on, that's when he maybe does draw a walk or something like that. It just feels like they're missing a lot of opportunities when he's at the plate, and I don't know. It's a bummer because he's been such a fun guy to cover just in my one season here, and he clearly is an immense talent. I mean, you saw him in the fall, I saw him in the spring before, we all saw his first month of the year, but something's going on there. So let's see. Hopefully I'm wrong on that. Hopefully he turns it around, but we'll all find out together this weekend. The Fayetteville Regional, Arkansas kicks off the action against SEMO, 2:00 on Friday. Follow us for updates and coverage throughout at NWA Hutch on X/Twitter, and I am at Jackson Fuller 16. Thank you all so much for listening. We will talk to you next week. I apologize if you can hear the lawnmower outside of my apartment right now. That's a fun way to end the podcast. But everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy the baseball, and we'll speak with you next week, either previewing the Super Regional or mourning the end of the Arkansas baseball season.